This will be a description of the Quickdraw weaving program's version 5.0 project setup screen. Now I can get to the project setup screen either by the tool lines here showing the text view of things, or by the view project setup screen. First thing it's going to show me is the pattern name as well as the path, and the pattern name is going to be the last segment of the path. It's then going to show me how many shafts and treadles, and I can either select a number of shafts or treadles I want, and it will automatically update the treadles. I can then revise that independently. If I want to, I can also increment that by singles or by 8. If I ask for 8 shafts, for example, and increment it by 8, it's going to walk up the scales. And so I've got small steps and big steps on shafts and treadles. The multi-treadle and lift plan allow me to determine what happens, what I'm displaying for the weft. Under normal conditions, if I enter the weft, if I select a thread, it's going to change it so that that's the only one set. If I have multi-treadle on, then when I select a thread, I can add an extra thread or delete it. I can also convert that tie-up to a lift plan, or if it's a lift plan, I can convert that back to a tie-up. The warnings enable here. If I look back at the message, I've got a couple of yellow markers here that indicates warnings. You may not really want to have duplicate threads, and the first thread matches the last, so a repeat would be a problem. So I can turn those off, as well as I have a flag here that says this pattern could really use a floating selvage. So if I turn the floating selvage on, I can then actually add a floating selvage tie. So I can physically note the floating selvages into the pattern design. Now I can select whether I'm dealing rising shed, falling shed, and one of the more important elements is the thread draft versus a profile draft. If I'm looking at a profile draft, I don't have as many different things to worry about. But I do have the ability of doing block substitution straight from here if I want to. There are several ways to do that. If I have a thread draft, the floating selvage questions are relevant. I have an ability to get to a treadle reducer and a few other tools that are unique there. I had also, the next part of the display tells me how many heddles, threads, or floats are pertinent to that pattern. Those apply only to a threading diagram. And the threading to profile actually would look through the block substitution lists and convert that threading diagram back into a profile draft, so I can then do that same pattern in a different weave structure, for example. And the thread draft, I also have control over the beat and which direction I'm throwing a shot for things like weaving wool-folded fabric. Which way it throws in is important. Now the other thing I hadn't talked about is the minimize shafts, treadles, the treadle reducer. I will do a separate video talking about how those can look through and figure out how to reduce stuff. The next part of the display here handles the general drawing format, whether I want the threading and treadling at the top and the order I want them, whether I want the treadling on the left or the right. So I can then select those. Once I get what I want, if I then hit that Save Default template, that will store both my preferences, including whether the warnings are enabled. And now all of my patterns would come up that way without having to specify that in each individual pattern. The color palette brings up the color palette tool, so I can add whatever color I want, build tools. And I can get to that several different ways, so I won't talk about it here. There's a separate video on that. The pattern notes allows me to enter, shows me what notes are present, and I can enter whatever note I want there. You can also do things like, here's the heddle count or a thread count, and I can copy that to the system clipboard so I can then paste it into another document. The export as WIF allows me to stay with a completely conventional WIF 1.1 or to go to an updated version, which hopefully will be more transportable should other programs read data out of the formats. The bottom tools down here are basically allow you to blend different weaving projects. So I can blend multiple patterns. I can compare multiple patterns to figure out whether things are the same. So that gives me the general structures And the log enable down here is just kind of a troubleshooting tool so I can see what's going on if there's a problem out there.
Okay, this will be an update to the project setup screens for your Quickdraw version 5.6. Now we've had draw looms under the shafts. What I just added is the shaft switching tools. If I ask for a shaft switching, it will work either from profile or from a blocks, and there's other functionality there. I'm going to do a separate video that talks about how those work, what those do. But this just points out that they are there on the project setup screen.